She was rushed to the hospital in labor, terrified and alone with no one by her side. The delivery room door opened, and her ex-husband walked in wearing a white coat. What he did in the next hour would heal wounds neither thought could ever be mended. The emergency room doors burst open as paramedics rushed a gurney through the bright fluorescent corridor, wheels squeaking against polished linoleum, while overhead speakers called for the obstetrics team with urgent efficiency. The woman on the gurney gripped the rails with white knuckles, her face contorted with pain as contractions came faster and harder, her breathing ragged and panicked, because this was happening too fast, too early, and she was utterly alone. Her name was Jennifer Matthews, 32 years old, 7 months pregnant with complications that had turned a normal pregnancy into an emergency, and the last person she expected or wanted to see was about to walk through the delivery room door wearing surgical scrubs and the professional mask of a doctor who'd spent 5 years learning to hide his emotions behind clinical what? Detachment. Before this story takes you into what happened in that delivery room, pause for just a moment. If you believe in forgiveness that shows up when needed most, in love that survives even after marriage ends, and in the way crisis can strip away pride to reveal what truly matters, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Untold Kindness Journey. Your support helps us tell stories that prove some connections run deeper than divorce papers. And sometimes the people we push away are exactly who we need when everything falls apart. Jennifer and David Matthews had divorced 2 years earlier after 6 years of marriage that had slowly crumbled under the weight of his demanding medical residency and her growing resentment of always coming second to his career. The fights had been bitter, the separation painful, the divorce finalized with lawyers and divided assets and the kind of cold civility that comes when love curdles into something harder to process than hate. They hadn't spoken in 18 months, had carefully constructed separate lives that never intersected, had both moved on or at least convinced themselves they had. Jennifer was engaged to someone new, expecting a baby with her fiancé who was currently overseas on a business trip, unreachable, leaving her to face this terrifying emergency completely alone. David had become exactly what he'd always wanted, a successful obstetrician at City General Hospital, respected by colleagues, devoted to his patients, filling the emptiness of his personal life with professional achievement. He'd dated occasionally, but nothing stuck. Nobody measured up to memories of Jennifer that he tried unsuccessfully to forget. Nights spent wondering if choosing his career over his marriage had been the biggest mistake of his life. This night he was on call, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, ready to hand over to the next doctor when the emergency page came through: preterm labor. Placental abruption, high-risk delivery needed immediately. He'd grabbed his surgical cap and rushed to the delivery room, his mind focused on protocols and procedures, completely unprepared for what he saw when he pushed through those doors. Jennifer's eyes met his across the delivery room, recognition hitting them both like electricity, her face showing shock and fear, and something that might have been relief before pride took over and shut it down. David froze for a half-second, every professional instinct warring with personal history, before training kicked in and he moved to her side, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Jennifer, I'm the attending obstetrician on duty. I know this is difficult, but you're in preterm labor with complications. I need you to trust me right now. We'll deal with everything else later. But right now I need to deliver your baby safely." His eyes held hers, asking permission, acknowledging their history while prioritizing her immediate need. Jennifer wanted to demand another doctor, wanted to scream at the universe for this cruel timing. But another contraction tore through her body and she had no choice, no time, no one else. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and David's professional mask softened just slightly before snapping back into place. He spoke to the nurses with calm authority, checking monitors, assessing the situation, his hands gentle as he examined her while maintaining the clinical distance required. "The baby's in distress," he said quietly. "We need to move fast. Jennifer, I'm going to do everything possible to keep both of you safe. I need you to breathe with me and push when I tell you. Can you do that?" The next 45 minutes were the longest of both their lives. David worked with intense focus, every skill and instinct sharpened by the knowledge that this wasn't just another patient, but someone he'd once promised to love and protect through everything life threw at them, a promise that had broken under pressure, but apparently hadn't completely died. He talked Jennifer through each contraction. His voice, the steady anchor she'd once relied on before resentment, built walls between them. And despite everything, despite the divorce and the anger and the 2 years of silence, some part of her still trusted him, in ways she trusted no one else. The complications multiplied. Jennifer's blood pressure spiking dangerously, the baby's heart rate dropping. Moments where David had to make split-second decisions between aggressive intervention and waiting. His hands steady, even though his heart pounded with fear he couldn't show. He called for additional staff, prepared for emergency procedures, but never let Jennifer see his concern, keeping his voice calm and reassuring, even when monitors screamed warnings that made everyone else in the room tense. "You're doing great," he told her, lying professionally because she was struggling and terrified, but she needed to hear strength, needed to believe this would be okay. "One more push, Jennifer. Come on, you've got this. I've got you." And then, with one final push and a sound like a miracle, the baby arrived, tiny and premature but breathing, crying with lungs that worked despite being weeks early. David caught the infant with hands that trembled slightly, now that the crisis had passed, his professional mask cracking as he looked at the small life he'd just helped bring into the world. "A girl," he said softly, handing the baby to the waiting NICU team who would provide the specialized care she needed. "She's small, but she's a fighter, just like her mother." His eyes met Jennifer's, and something passed between them, something that acknowledged this moment transcended their history, their divorce, their separate lives. Jennifer lay exhausted on the delivery table, relief and fear mixing as she watched doctors work on her premature daughter, but her eyes kept returning to David, seeing something she'd forgotten in the years of fighting and resentment. He hadn't left her side, hadn't handed her off to another doctor despite their history making this uncomfortable and complicated. He'd stayed because she needed him, because professional ethics and something deeper demanded he put her needs above his own discomfort. When the immediate crisis passed and the baby was stabilized, David should have left, should have handed post-delivery care to someone else. But he stayed, checking Jennifer's vitals personally, making sure she was comfortable, his professional distance softening into something more personal. Finally, when they were alone in the recovery room, Jennifer's voice came out hoarse and emotional. "Thank you for staying, for not making this about us." David sat in the chair beside her bed, looking exhausted and raw in ways his professional mask usually hid. "There is no us anymore," he said quietly. "You made that clear when you served me papers. But that doesn't mean I stopped caring whether you live or die, whether you're okay. I'm glad I was here. I'm glad I could help." He stood to leave and Jennifer's hand shot out, catching his wrist. "David, wait! We need to talk. About a lot of things." What happened next unfolded slowly over weeks while Jennifer's daughter fought through her premature start in the NICU. David visited often, officially to check on his patient, but really to see Jennifer. Conversations happening between them for the first time in years, without anger or lawyers mediating. They talked about what went wrong in their marriage, about the resentment that had built when she felt abandoned to his career, about his failure to balance work and relationship, about pride and hurt that had made communication impossible until it was too late. They talked about forgiveness, not the quick kind that papers over damage, but the slow, painful kind that requires honest acknowledgement of harm caused and received. Jennifer's fiancé returned from overseas, and watching him interact with their daughter in the NICU, Jennifer realized with painful clarity that she'd been trying to replace what she'd lost with David, rather than actually moving on. That this new relationship had been built on running away rather than running towards something real. She ended the engagement kindly but firmly, needing to be honest with herself and him about feelings that hadn't been fair to anyone. Meanwhile, David confronted the truth that his dedication to career had been partially about avoiding emotional vulnerability, about controlling something when his marriage felt uncontrollable, about choosing work because patients left at the end of shifts while wives demanded constant presence he hadn't known how to give. They didn't rush back together like a romantic movie, didn't pretend divorce hadn't happened or that everything was suddenly fixed. Instead, they rebuilt slowly, carefully, starting as friends coexisting in the NICU while Jennifer's daughter grew stronger. progressing to coffee conversations that became dinner dates, that became honest discussions about whether second chances were possible or foolish. David cut back his hours, setting boundaries at work he'd never maintained before, proving through actions rather than words that he'd learned from his mistakes. Jennifer worked on communicating needs rather than letting resentment build silently, on asking for what she wanted instead of expecting him to read her mind. 2 years after that emergency delivery, they remarried in a small ceremony, Jennifer's now healthy daughter serving as flower girl, both of them older and hopefully wiser, understanding that marriage required choosing each other daily rather than assuming love would sustain itself without effort. David framed a photo from the delivery room, not because it was a happy memory, but because it reminded them both of the moment when, stripped of pride and anger, they'd rediscovered why they'd fallen in love in the first place, proven that some connections survive even when marriages don't, and that crisis sometimes provides clarity impossible to achieve in comfortable times.